We're going to get started and try to respect everyone's time. Thank you all for coming. My name is Amy Marie. I'm with Families for Strong Public Schools. Welcome to this morning's press conference on the Federal Tax Credit School Voucher Program contained in the Reconciliation Bill currently before the U.S. Senate. The Reconciliation Bill includes a provision that would create a tax credit voucher program, diverting taxpayer dollars to private, often for-profit schools tucked within President Donald Trump's overreaching tax cut package dubbed the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. The proposal would direct $4 billion in public funds to private schools, disproportionately benefiting wealthy families while failing to protect students with disabilities. Additionally, the measure lacks accountability for private schools that would benefit from school vouchers and would disenfranchise voters in states that have rejected school voucher programs at the ballot box in recent years, such as Nebraska, Colorado, and Kentucky. But we can fight back. Look at Florida and Arizona as test cases demonstrating the unintended consequences that come from school voucher policies. Here to discuss the specifics and outline why senators should reject this proposal are Florida Representative Michele Rayner, who's going to join us a little bit later. She's doing a brief and she'll pop right in when she's done. Families for Strong Public Schools member Shauntel Smith, public education advocate and accountability author, Dr. Sue Woltanski, senior policy analyst and Florida Kids Count director, Dr. Norín. Please hold your questions until the end or pop them in the chat. A recording of the press conference will be shared later today. Let's begin. I'm going to share real quick here. I'm going to share a video from our parent who could not be here because she's at work, Shauntel Smith. She's going to share her story.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shauntel Smith, and I am a mother, an advocate, and a strong supporter of public schools. I believe in public schools as I am a product of the public school system, and I also have two successful adult children who graduated from public schools, and I have a daughter, Naomi, who is currently a special needs student in public schools in Florida. The reason why I'm speaking with you today is to support strengthening our public schools and to explain why I stand in opposition to using public dollars to fund private schools. First, on a positive note, public schools are the cornerstone to our society. As many of you know, most of our citizens graduated from public schools. And this rich quality education has afforded us the opportunity to greatly contribute to society and the world. Our public school teachers, administrators, and staff work diligently together to meet quality standards to ensure that once we leave our public institutions, we are well educated and ready to give society a great return on its investment. Moreover, public schools are dedicated to supporting students of varying backgrounds and who have diverse needs. For example, 65% of public school teachers have taken courses that have helped them learn how to serve students from diverse economic backgrounds. That's compared to 48% of private schools. Additionally, 70% of public school teachers report having training in courses that help them in serving special needs students. That's versus 49% of teachers in private schools. These efforts aim to create an environment where all students succeed. Yes, there are shortcomings, but still somehow the public schools find a way to meet our children's needs. And since they are public schools, it is somewhat their calling and their duty to do so because they have to be open to all students. Thus, public schools are not only dedicated to providing a well-rounded education, but they also offer critical services with things like to combat food instability or to help with after-school tutoring to help our students succeed. Vouchers, however, can lead to a reduction of these essential services for the students who rely on them. This is where I get to my concerns regarding using public resources to fund private schools. Again, unlike public schools, private schools don't have the requirement to give every student in the community that comes to them what they need. In fact, private schools can choose which students they admit, and they can choose which students they don't. So when children like my Naomi present themselves to public schools, the public schools by law and what is right have to give those students the resources to help them succeed, as every child has a right to a free and appropriate public education. The same does not go for private schools, as they are not required to follow the same guidelines. They're not required to provide the resources that are in the individual education plan. So again, when students like my daughter present themselves, they can be admitted with little to no support of their educational needs, or they can be turned away. But despite all that, the fact that public funds that are meant to support them and pay for their education are going to private schools. And that is very concerning to me. There are many stories that I have heard of special needs children who were enrolled in private schools, but the schools could not support them. So they had to return to public schools. Could you imagine the impact that that instability had on those families and those children? But the private schools are not only failing the most vulnerable of our children, they're also failing general education or typical children, as you may call them, because they don't have the same requirements for rigor and standards they are required through the public schools. So some of these students are finding themselves lagging behind their public school peers. So to me, as a person who cares about our society, our children, and our future, I must stand against this misguided legislation. It does not benefit society as a whole. It does not benefit most students, as most students are in public schools. The people that I see this benefiting are the owners of the private schools and the parents who were already paying for the private school education, who are now using these vouchers as a discount to something they were already could afford. So in closing, I would like to thank you for your time, for hearing my perspective. I believe that working together, we can strengthen our public schools and ensure that every child receives the support they need. Let's join to advocate for policies that benefit all students and make our education system stronger for everyone. Thank you again.
That was awesome. Next, we will hear from Dr. Sue Woltanski.
Hi, I'm Sue Woltanski. I'm a public education advocate and parent of 2 public school graduates. I also am I also blog the blog Accountable, and I serve, this is my 2nd term on the Monroe County School Board. I need to make clear that I'm speaking today as myself, and my views don't necessarily reflect those of the Monroe County School Board. I'm opposed to the federal voucher plan primarily because it's a big tax giveaway to wealthy investors, which will encourage them to fund private school vouchers rather than additional safety net measures that would help our public school students, like affordable housing, mental health programs, and the likes. When you have a program that offers 100% tax credit, financial advisors are going to advise the wealthy people to use that. Vouchers are not a new idea, and they're not a good idea. In fact, they're a failed idea. If you look at the data, students underperform, or they actually have learning losses in when they use a voucher to attend a private school. Florida knows this, that vouchers are not new to Florida. We've had non-means tested vouchers for a long time. And we know that 2/3 of those students return to public schools within 2 to 3 years, and often they're behind. And the public schools are expected and willing to catch them up. In Florida, our private schools are unaccountable, unregulated, unaccredited, and they completely lack transparency. And adding another layer of federal vouchers to that will reduce transparency even more. Florida now finds itself, since we went to universal vouchers in 2023, we find ourselves funding 2 separate programs, and our voucher supporters like to say that the money follows the child, but the truth is the money only follows the child if the money was placed in our funding formula in the first place. And new voucher students who never attended public school are being funded, are sucking up a large portion of the funding increases in Florida. So this past year, with a $900 million increase, over 700 million goes to brand new voucher students. There's a narrative that public schools budgets are being hurt because of students fleeing to vouchers. And while that may be the case in a few districts, even in my district, where our public school population has remained stable, our funding is being affected by the vouchers, specifically the vouchers that are not even in our voucher expansion, that's not even in our county. This next year, we're expected to have 149 more voucher students at the one, private school that's not in a church nursery or Sunday school. And we expect to have 15 fewer students in our school. But the money that goes to those voucher students now represents about 10% of our budget. So when we get budgeted for transportation or school safety, 10% of that is cut out to give to the voucher, which goes to a school that doesn't have any of those requirements or regulations. And so the voucher expansion is affecting public school budgets in Florida, regardless of whether the students are leaving our school. And then one last thing about the money following the child, that has been a real problem in Florida. Because vouchers are not a guaranteed spot in a school, they're like a hunting license. You get the voucher funded, and then you have to go find a school that will accept your child. And if your child is low income or has special needs, or you may not be able to find a private school willing to accept them within driving distance. And you may discover that, oh, they don't have buses and they don't have free lunch, and it's not going to work for me. And that happens to, thousands of students every year in Florida. And so the family shows up the first day of public school. And so, but the state refuses to fund the child in public school who has been given the voucher, even though the child has never used the voucher. And so states have been having to claw back that money. The children are in their seats. So the money follows the child out of the formula. It doesn't follow them back into the public school. And I have a hard time imagining how, when this is being managed at a federal level, that issue will be able to be handled at all. If you just add extra bureaucracy, we're going to find the money will no longer follow the students back to public school. the final thing is that my district, although it's property rich, I live in the Florida Keys. We have 8,800 students spread across 120 miles. So we're a rural community with a tourist economy and very few children compared to our regular population. Our children that attend our schools are the children of the workers in the tourist industry. And we provide them with a great education. In fact, public education in Florida remains the #1 choice in Florida. In fact, that it's been about 85% of people attending public schools for 25 years. You know, that bar has, that number has really not moved much. But in my district, we don't have a lot of businesses catering to children. In fact, if we want to buy new clothes or a birthday present, we have the dollar store. If we want to buy shoes, well, there's a sandal factory. We don't really have services to children, and we don't have mental health services outside of the school district. We don't have physical therapy or speech therapy that's affordable outside of the school district. We need our public schools, especially in rural areas. And as we get defunded with this idea that some kind of marketplace magic is going to create better opportunities, educational opportunities in our rural community for poor children, that's not happening. And this is going to overwhelmingly impact rural communities where they will lose the tax, the tax money will, they will lose the tax money, they will lose the investments in the nonprofits that support their children, and there will be no strong alternative to their public schools in place. So yeah, I think the federal government should not be involved in funding vouchers for children. Thanks.
Thank you so much. We're going to move on to Dr. Norín Dollard from the Florida Policy Institute.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. As Amy Marie said, I'm Norín Dollard. I'm Senior Policy Analyst with the Florida Policy Institute. And we're here this morning to offer Florida as a cautionary tale to what is going on in the federal reconciliation bill. The federal tax credit voucher, like many other things, all of the Medicaid, SNAP, threats to SNAP. There is also a tax credit voucher rolled into this. Formerly, it was called the Educational Choice for Every Child Act, or ECHA. It has a different name now, but the net effect is the same. I'll take a second and tell you what this bill does, and maybe should have done this earlier, but it creates the federal tax credit voucher of $4 billion annually, and there is no, in the Senate version, there's no provision for it to ever sunset. We know that in Florida, the way things started with vouchers is, the camel's nose under the tent. It started as a very small, circumscribed population, and over time it has grown, and even before the expansion to universal vouchers, covered up to families earning up to $120,000 a year for a family of 4. So it's pretty generous already, and has exploded since then. So we expect that this will be just the beginning. As Dr. Woltanski said, there is virtually no accountability in the federal provision. Just like that, in Florida, there are almost no guardrails whatsoever or oversight. And so the tax credit voucher is just that. It diverts money that would otherwise go into the public coffers to be used perhaps for education, but there are other governmental purposes it could be used for, and that's also the case here in Florida with our Florida tax credit voucher. At the federal level, it will be billions of dollars over time. The notion of the tax credit shelter, so donors to this, and as Dr. Woltanski said, you would be your advisors would be foolish not to tell you to invest in this, because there's 100% return on investment as compared to other types of charitable contributions that are much lower. A third of your contribution would actually be the tax available to the tax credit. The other thing is you can donate taxable securities, and you will not be responsible for capital gains tax. So there's a lot of advantages to investing in this, but it does take away from those other charities that we otherwise value in our communities. There are the implications of this. It's definitely federal overreach. There are many states across the nation in which voters have said they do not want vouchers in their state very clearly. Last year, Nebraska, Kentucky, Colorado all voted not to against vouchers, either in their constitution. This would provide that opportunity. Similarly, Mississippi has fought vouchers for years, but this would make it available in Mississippi. As Dr. Woltanski said, it benefits wealthy families. The families that get these vouchers, they're already in private schools, and they're already well able to afford it, or have made the choice that they would be in private schools. So this just subsidizes that choice for them. It does contribute to the federal deficit. It's not as nearly as the big ticket item as the cuts they're proposing to Medicaid, but it does still contribute to that. Like I said, there's huge potential for fraud and abuse. We've already seen that in Florida with large screen TVs and that sort of these sorts of expenditures, and there's very little supervision for what those funds are used for. 1 second, Jacob, and I'll answer. And I just, in closing, just to say that the notion of parental choice is not accurate. It's school choice. Schools choose children. Students don't choose private schools. So it also disadvantages rural students where there are, as Dr. Woltanski said, there are no private school options in those communities. And finally, these vouchers do not cover the full cost of tuition of the cost of going to private schools, be it transportation, uniforms, and other kinds of fines and fees. And so, we've joined Florida Policy is working with other organizations across the country and opposes this measure. Go ahead, Jacob, if you want to come off mute.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, I know Governor DeSantis has touted the fact we have more than 500,000 students on vouchers at the start of the year as evidence that voters do want this program. Why do you guys think the use of vouchers is growing so much if this system is actually failing education and failing students?
Go ahead, Sue.
I'll take that. First of all, when they passed HB1, they estimated that only 50% of the students in private school would take vouchers. And at this point, nearly all the private schools are accepting vouchers. Many of them are using them as a fundraiser. There's a Tony private school in Northeast Florida that has raised its tuition, the value of the voucher, asked its families to apply for the voucher so that they can build a state-of-the-art performing arts center. Most schools, many schools are now using the Voucher Plus plan for their tuition. So they are still charging tuition, but they've raised it, and they're requiring the voucher participation. So that's part of it. There were already, I think there's about 10, I think on the latest data, there's about 10, there were already 10 or 20, 10% of students in private school. And so it's partly that. It's also because it's free money and people are, as they defund the public schools, which they are doing, they have not kept up with inflation, and they have unfunded mandates that basically eat up the increases that they do give. And the voucher students or the voucher schools and the charter schools are not required to use the money in those ways most of the time. So public schools continue to be relatively defunded, and there's a constant narrative that public schools are failing. And I will state for the record, there has never in the history of school grades been a failing private school in Florida. Never. Because they don't grade private schools. And so any assumption that the private schools are better is an assumption. When a child goes to a private school, they are told their kid is doing great because they are the customer and the family needs to keep them there. When a kid goes to public school, we are required to tell them that they're not up to snuff if they don't do well on the tests. There is a tremendous narrative of failing public schools, and that, I believe, is why people leave the public schools for a few years and then they come back, because the grass is really not greener on the other side. And children with special needs and will never be served, except by the most expensive private schools that are designed to serve special needs. Does that answer? I mean, I know the numbers are going up, but over the next 5 years by the state's estimating conference, I believe that they thought that private school vouchers would go up by 240,000, and they thought the public schools would lose 60,000. Well, 60,000 loss for public schools is about 2.5% of the population. That's a blip. 240,000 new private school students, they're not coming from the public schools. I mean, if you do the math, they can't be if the public school population is not declining by an equivalent amount.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask if you guys feel like the voucher debate played a significant role in the fight we saw this year over AP and IB and ACE funding.
I could start, and Sue, you're welcome to jump on. I do absolutely think it was a factor. The amount that is in the proposed budget going to the governor, dedicated to vouchers, increases by 20% over last year. Teacher payout increases less than 2%, and so it far outstrips any increases that occurred elsewhere in the budget. So I have to think that it was a factor in the conversation, because there's just, there's only so much room to grow.
It played a factor in several different ways, and this might be too weedy, so I'm going to apologize, but you guys like the weeds, right? One is when they were they needed to have one thing Florida prides itself on is having a historic education funding. So they needed an increase in both base student allocation and in total funding per students. That otherwise it would say that they were not funding their schools properly. So the $49 that they gave in the base student allocation, well, you had to say that's an increase, even though it doesn't cover the cost of the FRS contribution and the teacher salary, which are both required the new teacher salary. That's more like $65 or $70, something like that. So they needed to have a place to show that there was more funding, and by taking the money out of the weights and putting it into a categorical, now it gets divided by the total number of students rather than being a weighted average. And that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that 2 years ago, they changed the way the FEFP was funded. They believe that the FEFP is too complicated. It's not really, but it's basically simple on its basics. But they felt it was too complicated, and it's not adequate for the money following the child. And so there are questions of why a homeschool family should get should get the money that was designed to or calculated in for teacher salary. There are no teachers in homeschool. There's no buses in homeschool. You know, it doesn't, the FEFP was designed to fairly and equitably distribute funds across the students across the districts of Florida. And when you start giving that away to unaccountable schools that don't provide those same services, then there was a problem with the funding formula. But when they moved the teacher salary allocation into the FEFP, or into the base student allocation, it increased the value of the base student allocation. So all of the sudden, the funding incentives for AP and IB and all of that sort of stuff were increased. Well, those were all invested in AP and IB programs. Then the final part is that they consider IB and ACE and career and technical choice programs within the public school system. And those are choices that families were making. Families are coming back to high school in public schools because they provide those services. And so it's hard not to believe that private schools feel that's an unfair advantage for the public schools to, I mean, I don't have no way of knowing that this happened, but it's hard to believe that they don't see that as an unfair advantage for public schools. So in multiple different ways, the vouchers play a part. Now, did it play a part in their minds? No, I think they're completely ignoring the impact of vouchers on the funding formula. They say, oh, you know, Danny Burgess bragged that it was $700 million going to new vouchers. Well, then you just, and then you're like, and they're cutting 220 from AP and IB. And he's like, oh no, we're not doing that. Well, you know, they were. So I'm hoping that the community that pushed back against the cutting of the funding to AP and IB will see the connection to the voucher programs and recognize that you know, funding an unregulated system of public schools is hurting their children's chance at the quality education which our public schools by and large are providing. Sorry, I'm long-winded.
Thanks.
No problem. Thank you so much. We're going to just take a quick break and let Representative Rayner pop on and introduce and speak if they're able to.
Hey everyone, thank you so much. I apologize my lateness. I was actually doing my day job. I was in a very long and protracted pretrial detention hearing. But I'm so happy to be invited. I'm so happy to be able to talk a little bit about this. I think just logging in and hearing some of the comments that were being made, I think that they're salient points. I mean, when you divert vouchers, divert public taxpayer dollars to schools and homeschool students. We've seen this movie before. We've seen it in Arizona. We've seen it in other states. It doesn't work. And what it does, it actually harms kids and not actually helps them. It doesn't provide more quality education. And I think, my biggest issue just as a lawmaker, there's a lack of accountability and there's a lack of oversight. And really, I think that there was an article that I have, if y'all give me a second, it's the most recent data on vouchers that was provided by Step Up for Students. So, I mean, there's that. The state's primary voucher funding organization dates back to September 2023. We're in 2025. Where's the money? How is it being spent? What's going on? And anytime that I find in the legislature where we want real answers, we want actually tangible things that we can point to where this money is going, how it's being used, so forth and so on. It's always a song and dance. It's always a shell game. And I think that the people, not only of this nation, but also certainly the people of the state of Florida, deserve to know where this money is going. And is it going to the point that was made earlier, homeschool parents for things that they don't utilize? Or is it going to corporations and they're only getting richer? So I am glad that this call is being made. I think that we have to keep pressure up. I think that we have to make sure that people are being aware that this is a real issue, because all of it is impacting our kids. And here's the thing, I want to also be super clear. When we talk about school choice, parents choose to have their kids go to public school. That is a choice as well. That is still a choice. And that choice is not worse or better than any other parent's choice to homeschool, go to a Step Up for Student school or whatever. But also, let's honor and do what's right by parents who choose to have their children enrolled in traditional public schools. So I appreciate y'all for this. Thank you so much for having me. I do have to hop back off because I'm driving to my next courthouse, but I just wanted to make sure I got on and just really be able to lend my support and voice to this, because this is such an incredibly, incredibly important issue.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time and your commitment to our kids.
Can I add one more thing? Sorry, like I said, long-winded, but
Go for it.
one of the reasons that the Family Empowerment Scholarship has increased is because we are funding PEP scholarships through the Florida Tax Credit Scholarship, and that's on an expansion each year. And those PEP scholarships are pushing students that are currently on the Family Tax Credit Scholarship off of the Family Tax Credit Scholarship, which has a maximum, and into the Family Empowerment Scholarship. So students that were funded on tax credits are now being funded by the state.
Yeah. Eric had a question about whether or not this affects Title I. The federal tax credit voucher, it's in itself does not address Title I, except that what it does do is divert that $4 billion from going into the coffers that would allocate money to Title I, IDEA, and other really important federal programs that support our schools. I mean, why not? Let's just take $4 billion and add it to Title I funding so that underserved students and underserved and communities can get the extra support that they need to be successful.
Thank you. Does anyone have any other questions? You're more than welcome to come off mute or type them in the chat. Any last comments from our experts?
Just the status report is, you're probably aware, but where what the reconciliation is right now is it's being reviewed under the Byrd rule, to see which is, constrains this process to only, fiscal policy and not general education policy. So that has not been decided in the case of the tax credit voucher, whether it would be excluded based on that, but that's what is going on this very moment. That process was supposed to end, well, it was supposed to end Monday and yesterday, it was supposed to end yesterday, but it's not over yet. And I guess the talk is that it'll be over the weekend when this comes out of Senate Finance and goes to the floor. So that's what I'm hearing anyways, just for a status update. And thank you all for joining us.
I have a question. Do you know if they're anticipating that the federal voucher will stack on top of the state vouchers?
No, they do have a provision that the state, if there's a state contribution, that would have to be deducted from the federal.
Okay, so this bill won't really impact the voucher programs in Florida so much since they're universal, but it will impact the contributions to the rest of the safety net things that we rely on in our community, the Healthy Start coalitions and those sorts of things that and the Feeding Florida, that we rely on for extra services within our schools and in our communities.
And there has been no conversation that I'm aware of anywhere in the state budget process of what will happen should all of these cuts go into effect. So there is that too. There's no actual provision that I know of.
Yeah, so at the same time that they're talking about cutting federal funding for many of these safety net programs, they are giving an incentive to private school vouchers over the nonprofit supports that might come in to fill the gaps when the safety net things are cut.
Yeah. Jacob, did you have a question? I thought I saw your hand raised.
I think you guys just answered it when you were talking.
Oh, okay.
But thank you for having me today.
Thank you for being here. No last questions. I will close out. Thank everybody for being here. As you've heard from our esteemed speakers today, the proposed federal school voucher program is not the parental choice opportunity that supporters claim it is. The legislation, if approved, would take resources away from our public schools, hurting our families who rely on public education, including in our rural areas or other places without access to private schools. Meanwhile, the legislation would add to our nation's already ballooning national deficit and impact students with disabilities or exceptional needs. The program would not improve education access for all students and instead would disproportionately benefit higher earning families whose children were already enrolled in private school while lacking oversight into educational curricula and practices to safeguard our children and ensure a quality education. I want to thank our speakers for taking their time to be with us today to shine a light on this critical issue, and to our friends in the press for the work that you're doing to ensure Americans are informed. Thank you so much. And if you have anyone in the media who has follow-up questions, Janelle Irwin-Taylor is in the chat. Hopefully she popped her email in there. But please reach out to her for any questions. Thank you.
And a press release and a recording of this video will be available later today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Good reminder. Thank you all for being here. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.